What happens when a nosy neighbor refuses to believe a black man could own the house next door, until the truth leaves her humiliated? Let's dive in to see how one phone call changes everything. The crisp autumn air carried the sound of cardboard boxes being dragged across pavement. Dr. Marcus Johnson, a 35-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon, wiped sweat from his brow as he hoisted another heavy box from his U-Haul truck. After years of saving and searching, he'd finally found his dream home, a beautiful Victorian in Oakwood Heights, an upscale neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and excellent schools. Almost there, Marcus muttered to himself as he carried the box labeled medical books up the walkway. He had been moving since dawn, determined to get most of his belongings inside before meeting his new colleagues for dinner. The prestigious Oakwood Medical Center had recruited him specifically for his groundbreaking research in minimally invasive surgical techniques. Across the street, Patricia Wilson peered through her curtains with a frown. The 58-year-old HOA board member had been watching the unfamiliar man for the past hour, and she didn't like what she saw. She had worked hard to maintain Oakwood Heights' character, and that meant keeping out people who didn't fit the community's culture. "Tom?" Patricia called sharply to her husband, who was watching golf in their den. "There's a strange black man at the Sullivan house. I think he might be breaking in." Tom sighed, barely glancing up. "Pat, we already talked about this. The Sullivans sold the place last month." Patricia's lips tightened. "To him? I doubt it. The Sullivans would never sell to, well, you know. And look at him. No moving company, no proper attire. Just going in and out like he owns the place." Tom ran a hand down his face. "Because he probably does own the place." Patricia scoffed. "$1 million home? In our neighborhood? No way. This isn't one of those areas, Tom. I bet he's squatting. Or worse, he's some kind of criminal setting up a drug house." Tom rolled his eyes. "Jesus, Pat. Listen to yourself." But Patricia wasn't listening. She had spent too many years ensuring Oakwood Heights remained a nice, safe neighborhood. She wasn't about to let this slide. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "Yes, hello," Patricia said, her voice steady with certainty. "I need to report a break-in in progress at 487 Maple Avenue in Oakwood Heights. There's a black man going in and out of the Sullivan house. The owners moved weeks ago, and he definitely doesn't belong here." "Ma'am, can you describe the individual?" Patricia exhaled impatiently. "Like I said, black. Mid-30s. Dressed like a common laborer, nothing like the kind of people who live around here. He's carrying boxes inside, which is weird. Who moves in like that? No moving truck, no family, just skulking around. Is he displaying any weapons or threatening behavior?" Patricia narrowed her eyes. "Not yet, but these people can turn violent fast. And I'm telling you, this doesn't feel right. The Sullivans were decent, respectable folks. He isn't. We'll send an officer to check it out, ma'am. Please don't approach the individual yourself." Patricia smirked. "Oh, I won't." Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of Marcus's new home, lights flashing but sirens off. Officers Ramirez and Dawson stepped out, approaching cautiously as Marcus emerged from the house. "Excuse me, sir," Officer Ramirez called out. "Can we have a word with you?" Marcus froze, immediately recognizing the situation. He'd been here before, mistaken for an intruder, a thief, a threat, simply for existing in spaces others deemed he didn't belong. "Of course, officers," Marcus replied, carefully raising his hands slightly. "How can I help you?" "We received a call about a possible break-in at this address," Officer Dawson explained, hand resting on his belt. "Mind telling us what you're doing here?" "I'm moving in," Marcus replied calmly, though his heart raced. "I purchased this house last month. The closing was on the 15th. Do you have any identification or proof of ownership?" Officer Ramirez asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "My wallet is just inside on the kitchen counter. May I retrieve it?" "I'll accompany you," Ramirez said. As they entered the house, Patricia Wilson marched across the street, arms folded, radiating smug satisfaction. "That's him," she said to Officer Dawson. "I've lived here for 20 years and I know exactly what kind of people belong here. We have standards, officer. That house wasn't meant for someone like him." "Ma'am, please stay back while we sort this out," Dawson said firmly. Patricia huffed. "I'm not trying to be racist, but come on. Be realistic. We both know he doesn't fit here." Inside, Marcus handed his driver's license to Officer Ramirez. "The property deed and closing documents are in my briefcase. I'd be happy to show you those as well." Ramirez examined the license. "Dr. Marcus Johnson?" You're a physician? Cardiothoracic surgeon, Marcus corrected politely. I just accepted a position at Oakwood Medical Center as their new chief of cardiothoracic surgery. Ramirez's expression softened. My mother had open-heart surgery last year at Oakwood. The doctors there saved her life. Marcus smiled genuinely. I'm glad to hear that. It's a fantastic hospital, which is why I accepted their offer and bought this house. I wanted to be close to work. Outside, Officer Dawson was trying to contain Patricia, who was becoming increasingly aggressive. You can't be serious, she spat. A surgeon? Here. That's impossible. I checked the listings last month. There were no sales to any doctors. And the Sullivans wouldn't sell to someone like that. Dawson stared at her. Someone like what, ma'am? Patricia faltered, her face flushing. I just mean, well, there's a certain kind of professional who usually moves here, you know? We don't just let anyone in. If the Sullivans sold to him, then they should have at least warned the HOA. What if he brings more in? Just then, a silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway. A distinguished older man with silver hair stepped out. Dr. William Sullivan, former chief of surgery at Oakwood Medical Center and the previous owner of the house. Marcus, I thought I might catch you during the move, Sullivan called out cheerfully, then paused when he noticed the police cruisers. Is everything all right? Officer Ramirez turned to Patricia with an unreadable expression. Ma'am, Dr. Johnson owns this house legally. The previous owner is standing right here. Patricia's face drained of color. But I thought. You thought wrong, Marcus said, locking eyes with her. You saw my skin before you saw me. Sullivan frowned at Patricia, then turned to Marcus. Welcome to Oakwood Heights, Marcus. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Patricia opened her mouth, but for once, she had nothing to say. Officer Ramirez explained the situation briefly. Dr. Sullivan's face darkened as he understood what had happened. Patricia Wilson, he said, turning to face her. I've known you for 15 years. I specifically told the HOA last month that I'd sold my home to my successor at the hospital, one of the most brilliant surgeons I've ever had the privilege to work with. Patricia's face flushed crimson. Bill, I didn't know. He didn't look like. Like what? Dr. Sullivan interrupted. Like a homeowner? Like a surgeon? Or just not like what you expected in Oakwood Heights? By now, several other neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the police presence. Marcus noticed their curious stares, the whispers, the smartphones discreetly recording the scene. Officers, Marcus said, his voice steady and dignified, I appreciate your professionalism in handling this situation. I understand you were just responding to a call. Ramirez nodded respectfully. We apologize for the disturbance, Dr. Johnson. Welcome to the neighborhood. As the officers prepared to leave, Patricia stood frozen in shame, the full impact of her actions beginning to dawn on her. Dr. Johnson, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to assume I was a criminal because of how I look? Marcus finished for her. Ms. Wilson, I completed my residency at Massachusetts General, did a fellowship at Johns Hopkins, and have published over 30 papers on innovative cardiac surgical techniques. I've saved hundreds of lives. Yet none of that was visible to you when you looked at me. All you saw was a black man who you decided didn't belong here. The growing audience of neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, perhaps recognizing similar biases within themselves. This isn't just about me, Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the now silent street. Think about what could have happened. Police encounters escalate quickly, especially when based on false assumptions. People who look like me have died in situations exactly like this one. Dr. Sullivan placed a supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus is not only my colleague but my friend. I selected him personally to take over my practice because he's the best in his field. Anyone in this neighborhood would be lucky to have him perform surgery on them or their loved ones someday. Patricia's eyes welled with tears of embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything right now, Marcus replied. But I hope you'll think about why you made the assumptions you did. Because until people examine those unconscious biases, these dangerous situations will keep happening. The police officers finally departed, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. Several neighbors approached to introduce themselves, some offering genuine apologies for Patricia's behavior, others clearly making an effort to demonstrate that they weren't like her. Dr. Sullivan helped Marcus carry in the remaining boxes from his truck. When they were alone in the kitchen, Sullivan sighed heavily. I wish I could say I'm surprised this happened, he said. I've watched similar scenarios play out with other colleagues over the years. It's inexcusable. Marcus nodded, unpacking a box of dishes. It's unfortunately not my first experience with this. Probably won't be my last either. What will you do now? Sullivan asked. About Patricia, I mean. Marcus considered the question carefully. I could file a formal complaint. She made a false police report that could have had serious consequences. But I think there's an opportunity here for something more meaningful than punishment. I think education is more powerful than punishment in cases like this, Marcus said thoughtfully. Tomorrow I'll invite Patricia over for coffee. Sometimes the most effective way to combat prejudice is through direct interaction. Later that evening, after Sullivan had left and Marcus had unpacked enough to make the house livable, he sat on his front porch with a glass of wine. The neighborhood had quieted, but he could feel eyes watching him from behind curtains and blinds. His phone buzzed with texts from his sister. How's the new place? Neighbors treating you right? Marcus sighed, considering how to respond. Before he could reply, he noticed a middle-aged black couple walking their dog on the opposite sidewalk. They slowed when they saw him, exchanged glances, then purposefully crossed the street to approach his house. Excuse me, the woman called out. Are you the new neighbor? The doctor everyone's talking about? Marcus stood and introduced himself. Word travels fast around here, I see. The couple introduced themselves as James and Denise Baker from 3 blocks over. We wanted to welcome you properly, James said, extending his hand, and to let you know you're not alone in Oakwood Heights. We moved here 5 years ago, Denise explained. First black family on our block. The neighborhood watch followed James for a week, and someone called the police when he was gardening in our backyard. Marcus shook his head in recognition. Some things never change, do they? They can, James said firmly. But only if we stay and demand the change. That's why we're still here. The next morning, Patricia Wilson stood nervously on Marcus's doorstep, clutching a basket of muffins. When Marcus opened the door, she couldn't meet his eyes. Dr. Johnson, I brought these as a peace offering, she stammered. I know it doesn't make up for what happened. Come in, Patricia, Marcus said, stepping aside. I've made coffee. In his kitchen, Patricia perched awkwardly on a stool while Marcus poured coffee into 2 mugs. I didn't sleep last night, she admitted. I kept thinking about what you said. I've never considered myself racist. I donate to charities. I voted for Obama. But yesterday showed you something about yourself you didn't want to see, Marcus finished for her. That's uncomfortable, but it's also an opportunity. My grandchildren visit every Sunday, Patricia said suddenly. My 10-year-old granddaughter wants to be a doctor. Would you be willing to meet her someday? To show her that her dreams are possible regardless of who she is or what she looks like. Marcus smiled genuinely for the first time in their interaction. I'd be happy to. In fact, I regularly mentor students interested in medicine. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Marcus opened it to find Officer Ramirez standing there, looking uncomfortable. Dr. Johnson, I wanted to follow up on yesterday's incident, he said. The department takes false reports very seriously, especially those with potential racial motivations. Behind Marcus, Patricia paled. Are you here to arrest me? Not today, Ramirez said. But I wanted to inform you both that this incident has been documented. Dr. Johnson, you have the right to file a formal complaint if you wish. Marcus glanced at Patricia, who looked terrified. Officer Ramirez, I appreciate your follow-up, but I don't want to pursue formal charges. Patricia and I are having a constructive conversation about what happened, and I believe that's more valuable than punitive measures. Ramirez nodded. That's your prerogative, sir. But I should mention that our department is implementing new community training sessions on bias awareness. The chief was hoping you might consider participating as a speaker, to share your perspective with our officers. Marcus raised his eyebrows in surprise. I'd be interested in that. Law enforcement needs to understand these situations from both sides. After Ramirez left, Patricia's hands trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. You could have pressed charges against me. Why didn't you? Because this isn't just about you and me, Marcus explained. This is about breaking a cycle. Nothing changes if we just punish individuals without addressing the underlying biases that led to their actions. Over the next week, word of the incident spread throughout Oakwood Heights. Some neighbors avoided Marcus entirely, embarrassed by association with Patricia's actions. Others made awkward attempts to prove their open-mindedness through excessive friendliness. The Bakers introduced Marcus to the handful of other black families in the neighborhood, creating a small but supportive community. They shared their own stories of microaggressions, subtle exclusions, and outright hostility they'd faced. 2 weeks after moving in, Marcus hosted a housewarming barbecue in his backyard. He invited everyone on his street, including Patricia Wilson. To his surprise, most neighbors attended, creating an uncomfortable but necessary mixing of people who might otherwise never have interacted meaningfully. Patricia arrived last, visibly nervous. She'd spent the past weeks reading books on racial bias that Marcus had recommended. When she spotted him talking with James Baker by the grill, she approached hesitantly. "Dr. Johnson, Marcus, thank you for inviting me," she said. "Most people wouldn't have." "That's precisely why I did," Marcus replied. Change doesn't happen in isolation. As the afternoon progressed, conversations moved beyond superficial pleasantries. When a neighbor asked about the incident, Marcus took the opportunity to facilitate a genuine discussion about assumptions, privilege, and the daily reality of being Black in America. "The problem isn't just individual acts of bias," he explained to the attentive group. "It's the systems that allow those biases to have potentially deadly consequences. When someone calls the police because a Black person looks suspicious for simply existing in a space, they're putting that person's life at risk." Patricia, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "I never thought about it that way before. I just saw someone who didn't fit my idea of who belonged here. I didn't consider how dangerous my assumptions could be." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the carefully manicured lawn, Marcus surveyed the gathering. It wasn't perfect, genuine change never is, but it was a start. In one corner, Patricia was showing pictures of her granddaughter to Denise Baker, discussing the girl's dream of becoming a doctor. James joined Marcus by the grill. "You know, when we moved here we considered leaving after that first week. Thought it wasn't worth the stress." "What made you stay?" Marcus asked. James looked around at the mixed gathering in the yard. "The belief that sometimes you have to be the change you want to see. That running away doesn't fix the problem." Marcus nodded. "I've operated on people of every race, religion, and political belief. Inside we're all the same, fragile organs and beating hearts that need care. If only everyone could see that." "Not everyone will," James replied realistically. "But some will. And that's how change happens. One person, one neighborhood, one community at a time." If you enjoyed this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And let me know in the comments, have you ever seen someone underestimated just because of who they are? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.